Cuba calls for its people to grow their own food amid shortage. Planes grounded in Pakistan due to some pilots not having a license to fly, controversy in Hong Kong, and a look into the series of events leading up to the US invasion of Iraq. This is the world at large, and we are Politics 1001. Politics 1001. Ah, the world at large.
You know what, Josh? I'm really excited today to jump right into this.
Me too.
So, Cuba, something's going on with food shortages there. Why don't you tell me all about this?
Absolutely. So the Cuban government has called on its people to grow their own food and try to be more self-sufficient. The reason for this is a lot. There's a lot of different reasons, but the main one for that is that the U.S. placed an embargo on Cuba last year and kind of tightened the grip around the country and its imports. And Cuba importing 2/3 of its food, which is worth up to $2 billion. It's really, really hurt their economy and their food source in general. And because of the declining tourism industry, which is right now kind of non-existent, Cuba's really struggling for money right now. So people around Cuba are growing stuff on their balconies. They're growing stuff in their backyard. They're growing stuff on the street. So wherever there's room, really, because the government says the Cuban people do. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing right now. And it's been so bad with this embargo that Cuban exports in a single year dropped by 18%.
Wow.
Yeah, which is big because Cuba is a barely big agricultural nation.
Right. Cuban cigars.
Yeah, outside of the city of Havana, that's pretty much what everyone does.
Yep.
And so, with that, this embargo, of course, affecting the non-existent tourism, has led to a large increase in poverty. And so you see long lines all around the Cuban capital of Havana due to these food shortages. And so literally lines stretching around the city for this one grocery store, and people are walking out with like maybe a few mangoes. It's getting pretty bad. And this has become more and more of a reality in Cuba today. And it's not, the people are the ones suffering from this.
Right.
And this lack of imports, again, is estimated around $2 billion. So when you see all of that and combining that with the already not so good economic situation of Cuba, you can understand the sympathy coming from all around the world going towards the Cuban people. Nevertheless, we'll see how Cuba handles this in the future.
It really saddens me because I love Cuban food.
It is good.
You know this, Josh. I have a Cuban cookbook.
Mm-hmm. I did not know that.
I love Cuban food, so this really saddens me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Cuba they are very strong people, so they hopefully will get through it.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, let's move on to Pakistan.
Right. So you said earlier that something about planes being grounded because people didn't have a license?
Yeah, so kind of an awkward situation for Pakistan. Yeah. So the PIA is the national airline of Pakistan. It has grounded about 1/3 of its aircraft due to fake pilot licenses. So this is approximately 262 pilots who were flying without a license. So you might be wondering, Ian, how did this happen? So,
I am wondering that.
So a lot of these people are paying other people to go take the test for them. Kind of what the people do with the SAT in the United States. They're just, I don't know it, so I'll have someone else do it. And, well, this is a little bit more extreme than the SAT because, well, these people have possibly over 100 people's lives in their hands when they're flying a plane. Yeah. So
they're in the sky, not a classroom.
Yeah. So the minister, the Pakistani minister of aviation was furious with us. He's like, why are there so many people flying who don't have a license to do this? So this has been going on for a long time, but an investigation was recently opened up after a plane in late May, I believe May 22nd, crashed and killed every passenger on board except 2.
Jeez.
And so when they opened up an investigation, because sadly these things do happen, so maybe it was just a mistake, but they opened up the investigation, and after going through the footage, according to the minister, and quote, the pilots were discussing corona throughout the flight. They were not focused. They talked about the coronavirus and how their families were affected. And they also proceeded to ignore standard procedure when, for example, the wind patterns in the air, it's It's really big. You have to kind of fly with the wind or around it. You don't want to drive right into something that could be deadly. However, they didn't do any of that.
I'm not a pilot, but I'd imagine that you need to stay focused when you have a ton of passengers.
Yeah, it was 92 people, I believe, that were killed.
Wow.
So
that's really sad.
Yeah, and these pilots did not. So it's not actually revealed whether these pilots had a license or not. All we know is that they were distracted. But because these pilots went down and the investigation opened up, that's how people found out. That's how the government in Pakistan found out. Wait, there's actually a lot of people flying without these licenses. So we don't actually know if they did have it, but well, the plane still went down. These people were clearly not focused, and they were talking about their own personal lives and their families.
Right.
So going on,
fine to do outside the pilot seat, but.
Yeah, maybe not in it.
Not in it.
It's so you see airlines such as Qatar Airlines, Vietnam, Oman. They've all compiled a list of all these pilots in question who do not have licenses and will not let them fly until they've been given permission by the Pakistani government, which most people agree with.
Right.
But
I'm a little surprised there's not more severe punishments.
Yeah, well, these people are probably going to get in a lot of trouble, but it's currently in the investigation phase.
I see.
So
I see.
There'll probably be better results in 1 to 2 weeks. But nevertheless, it's likely going to extend beyond just these 3 countries. It's going to be a whole wave of people because, well, you don't want people flying your civilians who do not have a license to do so.
Yep. Understandable.
Yep. Yeah. It's very surprising how they got away with it for this long, and how the system is designed so that 1/3 of your pilots are actually able to get through without taking the test. It's so a lot of question in the Pakistani Ministry of Aviation there, but
yeah,
at
definitely.
least. Well, yeah, so moving on, we're going to move on to Hong Kong now.
Ooh.
So, a controversial bill has been signed in China, and this bill essentially gives China a lot more power in Hong Kong. China's been pushing their power a lot lately. They're not trying to hide this. They do want more authority over the city. They're trying to integrate them very soon by 1948. And so because of this, they have passed this other bill.
1948?
It's 2048. Yeah. And so...
Don't worry, guys. I found the error.
Good catch. And so what this bill does is it allows for the Chinese security forces to deploy in the city and investigate security cases and just collect intelligence. At least that's what China says. According to critics of the bill, this allows China to assert more authority over the city, take away from its autonomy that it's supposed to have, and its freedom in general. It allows it to crack down on people. It furthermore allows the Chinese authorities, specifically Carrie Lam, who runs the city, to appoint judge. So when someone gets in trouble, they have to go see a judge. Mm-hmm. And if it's a certain crime, such as, I don't know, something the Chinese government doesn't like, then Carrie Lam has the ability to appoint her own judge, who theoretically would just think the same way as her,
right.
Who in Carrie Lam is pro-China. And so essentially the Chinese government has the ability to appoint judges that agree with them, so that people who are being dissentful against the government are likely to face a more severe punishment.
Right. You're taking the objectivity out of the court.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what's scaring the people of Hong Kong the most. But again, China is just saying that this is to help quell the dissent in the city because there are a lot of riots going on. People are getting hurt. Police are getting assaulted. And so China's just trying to quell this rebellion, that as they refer to it as, and just kind of establish a more peaceful setting in the city. Right. Yep. So with that, we're going to move on. Good luck to Hong Kong. But we're gonna move on to France. So once again, we're going to be talking a little bit about Libya, but this more has to do with the French-Turkish relations. So French President Emmanuel Macron recently visited Germany to talk with Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, and they had a little discussion. You could see them in the picture. They had a nice little coffee table, and it was just Macron and Merkel. They were just talking to each other. I don't believe either of them speak each other's languages, so I don't know how that
good photo shoot
how that works. But I heard Merkel can understand French, but she can't speak it. I don't know if that's true. But anyways, they were there. Well, Macron was there. He took that opportunity to conveniently slam Turkey and say that they do not respect the situation in Libya, and has said that Ankara is an obstacle in achieving peace in the war-torn country that, again, is going through a civil war. And so Macron slammed Turkey, and there's like, Turkey, stop importing mercenaries from Russia, stop importing mercenaries from Syria, we need to create the ceasefire, and you are not helping with that. Turkey obviously disagrees with that, and they just want their UN-recognized government to win the war. But Macron is not having it. He's saying, Turkey, you're just purposely creating instability in the region. It's ridiculous. And so because of that, this has obviously soured relations between Turkey and France, and although it's a little questionable which side of the Libyan war France actually supports, there's been rumors that France has sent aid to the side of the war that Turkey's supporting, but nevertheless, this is pretty big news. And the June 10th, I believe, French and Turkey kind of had a little bit of a naval issue in which the French Navy a ship was in the Mediterranean, and the Turkish Navy was quote unquote harassing the French ship, according to the French Ministry of Defense, and this angered France even more, which is probably one of the reasons that France took the opportunity to do this.
Right.
But Turkey denies it. They said, we are not harassing France. France, cut it out. Stop trying to make us look bad. But overall, this is certainly not helping relations between Paris and Ankara.
Nope.
Nope.
I can't imagine it does. What does harassing a ship look like? You just
so
around the ship
they kind of they get really close to you, like they're
Right.
gonna ram into you. Possibly looks like they're being aggressive. Maybe they're circling around you.
Right. You have to maneuver a ship and you don't want another big naval ship around you doing that.
Yeah, it's just dangerous.
Okay.
But again,
Thank
Turkey denies all of that.
Right.
And so
Naturally.
And so we're gonna move up to Russia and Scandinavia.
Ooh.
So Scandinavian countries, after an investigation by the Dutch, have determined a larger than normal presence of radiation in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see an abnormal amount of radiation in the air, you tend to investigate that.
Right.
So hence the Scandinavians investigated it, and they concluded that it came from Russia.
Yeah.
Russia was kind of angry that they made these allegations, saying that it did not come from Russia, not from Western Russia, which is where they claim it came from. And they said that it's ridiculous. Why are you accusing me of that? Yada, yada, yada. And so,
To be fair, considering where Scandinavia is and where Russia is, I'm going to guess the radiation is coming from Russia.
yeah, well, that's why they determined it came from the east of Scandinavia, and, that's where Russia is.
Yeah.
So, that's what they said. So there's a belief that there is a radiation leak in Russia, but there is no confirmation of this because Russia, again, is trying to cover it up if it is happening, but it might not be. So we don't really know.
I know that Scandinavia in the past has felt the effects of Russia's nuclear programs.
Yeah?
Yeah, I know that. There's radiation after Chernobyl. I know this. It's up here.
All right. Awesome, Ian.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is true. In Chernobyl today, it's still pretty dangerous to visit it,
Mm-hmm.
which, again, is in southern Ukraine, if you didn't know, in which a plant literally exploded and killed the entire town.
They have tours, though.
They do have tours. You just got to be careful.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's all the news we have for today. However, we are going to get into our historical topic, which is today the Iraq War.
But before we continue, I would like to shout out my friends over at the Average Citizen Podcast. They are a podcast which discusses topics from politics to society with an average citizen. They're really entertaining, really informative, and I think you guys will enjoy it. So go check them out. They're on Google Podcasts and Spotify.
Yeah. So in 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq, annexed it, and occupied it until the beginning of the Obama administration. And so we're going to kind of go through the events that led up to that and why the U.S. decided to do that. So this was known as the Gulf War. We're going to go back to 1938 because that's where our story begins. And this starts with the Al-Sabah family, which was the ruling house of Kuwait. They ruled there starting in 1938, but Kuwait was a British protectorate from 1899 to 1961. And so upon independence in 1961, hostilities between the Al-Sabah family in Kuwait and Iraq began to increase exponentially because Iraq claims that they have a claim on Kuwait, and that it's their territory and it should be ours to have. And the Kuwait wasn't really having that. They had their own royal family and they kind of wanted to stay in power. And so they begged for help from the British, who immediately rushed back after just giving them their independence to protect Kuwait. And they kind of settled down for a little bit. And as the British Empire started to collapse, the U.S. took over as the prominent protector of the Gulf states, so including Kuwait. And so the U.S. military began to help Kuwait protect its oil reserves, specifically from Iraq, who wanted it really badly. And yeah, you do see that power shift really, really fast. And so this settled hostilities for about a decade until the Iranian Revolution, when the Shah, or King of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who's more commonly known as Mohammad Reza Shah, was overthrown on February 11th, 1979. Upon that overthrow, Iran started to look a lot more like it does today, with an Islamic Republic with a Ayatollah at the head of the state. And so what is seen today, well, what happened in Iran then is that they took back control. The government, the new one, not the Shah, took over control of the oil companies. And so what was happening is the British and the Americans had a large influence over the oil companies of previous Iran before the Islamic Revolution. And this is what mainly led to the revolution, is that the Shah was getting pushed around by the West, and their oil and resources were getting exploited by them. And so that's kind of how Mohammad Reza Shah came to power, or how he was overthrown. And so immediately upon overthrowing the monarchy, they took control of their oil, of their own oil, and they cut off the British, they cut off the Americans. This made them very, very angry because they wanted the oil, and naturally. And so you see that happening, and this is what kind of turned the Americans against Iran and became more in favor of Iraq for now. And so in September 22nd, 1980, war between Iraq and Iran broke out when Iraqi forces crossed into the borders of Iran due to hostilities again. Because Iran had overthrown the Shah, you do see these sour relations between the U.S. and Iran, and so immediately the U.S. comes to the aid of Iraq and starts supplying them with aid and whatnot. And so Kuwait, oddly enough, despite the hostilities, ended up supporting Iraq in the war, despite the fact that Iraq openly wanted to conquer them. And so this, which led to Iran being kind of pissed, and they
Why did they do that?
They don't like Iran. So Iran is a different branch of Islam. And,
I see.
And so you see every Gulf state, even today, every Gulf state is against Iran. Saudi Arabia despises Iran. UAE despises Iran. Oman, not a big fan. And so yeah, you do see those hostilities. And so Kuwait at this time, they did not like Iraq at all, but they did not like Iran even more. And so they picked the worst of the two in their opinion. Considering what happened in the future of Kuwait, they probably should have picked Iran, but we'll get to that. And so Iran was really mad that Kuwait was supporting Iraq. They were, why are you these people are literally trying to conquer you. And so Kuwait did it anyways, and Iran immediately began starting to target Kuwaiti oil tankers. And so Kuwait asked the U.S. for assistance. The U.S. happily guarded their oil because they love doing that, and they went in and they protected it. And so you see that, and the war ended in 1988 with pretty much a stalemate. Neither side gained or lost anything except a ton of lives and money. And so 2 years later, in August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein, who is very infamous today for being Saddam Hussein, he launched an invasion of Kuwait. So Kuwait, kind of regretting supporting them now, and he swiftly annexed them. Kuwait really couldn't do anything, and the al-Sabah family went into exile to Saudi Arabia, I believe. And so he thought the Americans wouldn't care because the Americans supported him in the war against Iran. He was wrong. The Americans cared very much that they targeted Kuwait. President George Bush, who's the president of the U.S. from 1989 to 1993.
Yes, this is Bush Part 1.
Yeah, Bush Part 1. He sent 500,000 troops to Saudi Arabia to deter Iraqi influence. This this should have scared Iraq, theoretically, who was now occupying Kuwait, but Saddam blew this off. This includes when the UN Security Council demanded that Saddam Hussein cede Kuwait back to re-establish its sovereignty and pull out immediately under the threat of embargo and military action under any threat necessary. Saddam Hussein, again, didn't care at all. He's like, okay, you can't defeat me. The Iraqi army was considered one of the most powerful in the world at the time, for context. Even leading up to the Gulf War, it was considered like the third or fourth most powerful in 2003, until the U.S. absolutely quashed it. But it was considered very powerful, so Saddam Hussein thought he could take on any coalition form against him. He was kind of wrong. So for the first 6 weeks before the invasion, the UN, led by the U.S., targeted they just sent missiles into Iraq and Kuwait, targeting infrastructure. They targeted oil reserves, and they targeted military bases and military sites, and just scared the people there. The main purpose was to disable Iraqi air defense, Iraqi defenses in general, just weaken them. So all they would literally have are ground forces and their really out-of-date tanks. And so that's what they did. So February 24th, 1991, 6 weeks later, Operation Desert Storm began. And this Desert Storm was a land invasion of Iraq. It took 100 hours, and over 2,000 Iraqi tanks were destroyed by the U.S. The U.S. didn't lose one, and the U.S. just invaded, and they just swept through the Iraqi defenses. The Iraqi army they were way more overconfident Saddam was way more overconfident he could take on the U.S. than he should have been, because he got defeated, and he sued for peace. He pulled out of Kuwait, ceded it back, and Iraq was still allowed to actually have an air force. For humanitarian purposes, they claimed. So Iraq did manage to maintain their planes. They did, however, go on to use that air force to shoot down rebels from the air. So a little bit of dispute there if it was necessary. But anyways, Iraq pushed out. So Iraq at this point was kind of crippled. They were defeated, but Saddam Hussein was not giving up. He was still in charge. And so just kind of existed there from 1990 to 2003 for 13 years. However, during this time, there were very blatant human rights abuses. Iraq had chemical weapons. They were not very secret. Well, so they were trying to be very secret about this. The U.S. believed they had them, and they used that as one of the justifications for invasion. But Iraq was committing human rights abuses. They were still threatening Kuwait, and overall, they were rebuilding their army. And so, in 2003, the U.S. did their famous invasion of Iraq, in which they referred to Saddam Hussein as an evil person who was a human rights abuser and invaded. And this was actually very bipartisan. The Congress supported this, who you need to declare war. And so
this was after 9/11.
Yeah, this was 2 years after 9/11. So that was also a big part of it for the invasion. Again, they thought they had chemical weapons, but overall they just thought that Saddam Hussein's a terrible person, needs to go. And so the U.S. invaded and absolutely destroyed Saddam Hussein. He went into a hole for, I believe, 6 months or something before they found him. But the Iraqi army was destroyed. The people tore down statues of him, but they wouldn't even. The people who knew where Saddam was, they wouldn't give up where he was hiding, because they were so scared that they were going to get killed or executed, even though Saddam Hussein was defeated. But that's how much fear they had. Wow. And so Saddam was found, and that was kind of the end of Iraq. And we occupied it until 2009, I believe, where we pulled out. And during that time, you saw a lot of infrastructure improvements in Iraq. You see electricity being brought to most civilians. And so there's a big debate on whether we should have invaded or not. Most people who say we should have will point to Saddam Hussein's terrible record of human rights, and will also furthermore point out that the Iraqi standard of living, despite the turmoil that the country is in today, is way better than it was in 2003. A lot more electricity is seen. There's a lot more. There's way more freedom than there was under Saddam, and a lot more democracy. They just elected a new prime minister, whose name I'm blanking on, but they did just elect one. And he's supported by both Iran and the U.S., which is weird. And so you do see a more democratic Iraq today, although the country's still in turmoil. And people who say no will naturally point to the huge price tag of the invasion, and furthermore will say that it wasn't really necessary, and you just destabilized the Middle East, and it likely contributed to the rise of ISIS. So with that, well, the UN, by the way, did say that this invasion was illegal, because they didn't approve of it. The Security Council didn't, but they didn't really do anything about it. So the U.S. did invade, and the U.S. government did approve of it. So with that, we are going to be wrapping up our podcast today.
Yeah, I think we are.
We are. So if you enjoyed, please remember to leave a like, subscribe.
And if you're listening on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere where this podcast is found, please consider subscribing. Maybe leave a 5-star review. Tell your family and friends all about this show.
Yep.
Even a stranger, too.
Strangers are nice.
Yeah, talk to them about this. If you see one on the train, have you heard about The World at Large? It is my favorite podcast. Go listen to it.
Yeah, I know I have.
I bet he has.
Okay, so with that, guys, we hope you have a great day. Continue to listen, continue to learn, continue to read, and we'll see you all later. Goodbye.